talk to my audience about rotoscoping, the process of it? Because today is not a commercial or a music video that doesn't use rotoscope. I think people think that it's a new process today.
Well, the process was devised by Max, I guess, around, I would say 1918 or so. And the way it went is Dave was the actor, and they...
Now Dave portrayed Coco.
Yeah, he did Coco. He dressed up in a clown suit, and he did the action that was going to be in the cartoon at some point. And Max invented this machine where you could put a 35mm movie into it and advance it one frame at a time and advance it in registration. In other words, the frame that came on after the frame that had been there went to the millimeter where the other one had been, you see, so it didn't jiggle around. And the animator traced these drawings of Dave off onto a sheet of paper. And then he took a second sheet of paper, and over that drawing of Dave, he put Coco the Clown. Now, of course, he had to make allowances for differences in proportion and so forth. But even so, he had the basic movement there so that it did look lifelike. And the same process, to a large degree, was used in Roger Rabbit.
And at this time also, was Coco was very popular, but at this time the hottest stars at that time in the 20s was what, Felix the Cat?
Yeah,
Coco the Clown.
In the 20s, the mid-20s, no. I went to Max's in 1930. By that time, Coco had faded. I worked on the last Coco the Clown that was ever done as an entity. He appeared in other movies, but in a supporting role. So I worked on the very last one that they decided he was through. Now, Max had a big fault. Well, all the studios had a big fault. The stories that they did were usually terrible. They were made by calling together a number of animators after work, bringing out a bottle of whiskey and some cigars, and sitting around talking for about 2 hours on the kind of story they should do. And each animator got a rough idea of what he should do, and they went off, and that was the story meeting. So it's no wonder the stories were terrible.
No structure at Fleischer?
No.
Not like at Disney looked like he...
So they didn't believe it. In fact, you see, the studio, the people who stayed in the studio went along with Max that the cartoons were cartoons. They didn't need principles or rules or anything. The whole idea that there was any structure or you had to have a story that had a good middle, beginning, end, and so forth. They thought that was nonsense, absolute nonsense. You did whatever came with your mind, and that was good enough. What the hell? The audience didn't care, and you didn't have to care either. Now, this was in spite of the fact that Walt Disney was doing trees and flowers and good Mickey Mouse things and so forth. And for for the 2 years I was at Max's, Disney kept getting better and better until finally I went to a movie house. I was looking at things that I didn't know how they did it. And we certainly were never going to do it at Max's. So the contract I had was a 2-year job. I stayed, but I was anxious to get away. As soon as possible, I went to Hollywood. Max Max's crew just stayed in the status quo is what they wanted, you know. When I came to Paramount in '66 to be head of the cartoon studio there, I found them still trying to figure out camera moves and pans and so forth by numbers instead of a decimal system. I mean, imagine trying to add 5 and 7 1/8 and 1/16. You could go crazy. Now, when I called the animators together one morning, I had been at Paramount about 2 days, looked all around, pulled my hair. I announced to the animators that I was going to take this onus off them, and they were going to just do drawing the way they're supposed to. They were never again going to do camera moves. That was the problem of the cameraman, and let him do it. You can imagine the result. They were in a fury. They wanted to do the numbers the way they were used to, and began to argue with me, and I refused to be argued with. I threw them out. So, in fact, several days later, I went into the animation department, and I sat down in the middle of the room, looked all around, and I said, you know, I have spent this whole morning looking at your work on the screen, and I feel very good, because dead drunk, I couldn't do such crap. And walked out. I gave him a shocker. Well, it worked, because in about 6 months we had a movie over in Annecy. In the 50 years that studio had been around, I think they were up for 2 Academy Awards, and that's it, in the whole time. We had a picture in Annecy right away. Anyhow, to go back to Max and Dave and the dear old days, one of the weird things that happened is about something called mouth action. Mouth action, of course, is the drawing you do to make a character appear to speak. And several of them got into the weirdest concepts of how you make somebody speak. How you make somebody speak, really, is with the body. You have only to turn off the sound on a news broadcast to see just how much body English contributes to speaking. But they decided that a character's mouth closes after every word. It's just complete nonsense. Now, I went over to the library and I took out books on diction and stuff, and I soon found out that that was wrong, but it didn't change their minds. There's a collection of conservatives to the nth degree. It's hard to imagine. In the face of the changing times, and they grimly went on making the same mistakes over and over. So I will jump out to Miami on Gulliver. They imported a lot of Hollywood animators, including me. And one fellow, named Al Euster, animated a scene in a picture without doing the mouth, because what we used to do at Disney's is do the animation of the body English and then see how it's synced up with the soundtrack, and maybe juggle it 2 exposures or so, 3 this way or that, and then draw the mouth on, instead of doing the whole thing and then having to erase mouths. So he did that. He animated a character with no mouth. And Dave was in the projection room looking at the pencil test, said, gee, that's very nice mouth action. Al said, there isn't any. He said, what do you mean there isn't any? That's very good mouth action. He said, I didn't draw it yet. So they had to run it back and show Dave the body English was in sync, looked good, not mouths.
Not mouths.
So they had this hang up, and you see some of the early Betty Boops, for example, they had ooh sounds with the mouth coming out like it looked like the kind of a gadget on a bicycle that you put the air in, stuck out like this, because they really didn't want to look at what happened. They just had these preconceived dopey ideas. I'm going to need something to drink.
Oh, sure, let's stop for that.
Sure.
Easily.
Off the cuff.
Is, in your opinion, liberalism...
I'm going to intercut all this with clips. It'll look really good.
Sure.
You got me shocked about Dave Fleischer.
That's a terrible mess. He got an award from Masifa for lifetime achievement.
Did the other animators at the studio resent him? Artists, other people?
Some did. We all left.
So there's no real families at these places. The family. I mean, the family feeling you're working for somebody.
There was a wonderful feeling there when we worked on a picture and we realized we weren't going to make the deadline. We would work overtime. Now, Max was the only man in the whole business who would pay overtime. He paid it, not grudgingly. He just paid it. And so very often we would work all night and get the picture out. One fellow worked 2 nights and 2 days overtime and got the picture out in time. No, we had a great loyalty, Max, a fierce loyalty, which I wasn't there during the strike, but the whole studio had this feeling that this kindly old Victorian was taking care of these dedicated Victorian employees. So when the strike came, it was a tremendous blow to Max, to his ego as an employer.
Because he felt you should trust him.
He felt you should shut your mouth and do what he said. And the others, that he should let them down and cut their wages when the rest of the business was doing well. And stupidly enough, Dave had just bought a new car that week. I mean, that's the kind of stupidity that they exhibited. So it made a very ugly strike, which they never got over. The ins and the outs remained separated even after the strike was over. I went down to Miami to work months after the strike, and I saw that all the people who went on a strike ate in the commissary by themselves. The others hung around with Max. And so when I went to talk to both sides, because I had friends in both camps, afterwards I was accosted in the hall by a guy named Willibowski, who was one of the arch, how should I say, he was buttering up Max every 10 minutes. It was vomitous to hear him. So he advised me not to mingle with those other people. So I told him to try an impossible sexual act. Really, I was so infuriated, this jerk. You know.